Welcome to Gospel Legacy in New York City, a podcast created by City to City, New York City. Today's episode was filmed live at Redeemer East Harlem. Co-host Jennifer Chan wasn't able to attend this live event, but I was joined by Mai Hariu-Powell, Executive Director of the New York Project, who you may remember hearing from in a previous episode this season, as she and James Herring spoke with us about a 10-year vision for New York City called the New York Project. In this live episode, we had the privilege of interviewing several of the senior pastors at Redeemer Presbyterian Church. They included Michael Keller at Lincoln Square, Justin Adour at East Harlem, and Pete Nicholas at Downtown. I was honored to be joined by these wonderful friends, so without further ado. So I want to welcome everyone. Today we get to have this conversation in front of a live audience with live Q&A, and so it's a very special episode. And as we've already done, we want to thank Redeemer East Harlem for allowing us to record and film here. I'm Kristian Hernandez. I'm one of your hosts. Jennifer Chan, who normally co-hosts with me, is sadly out of town, so I've asked one of my colleagues from City to City to join us, Mai. And Mai, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. So I'm Mai Hariu-Powell. I'm the Executive Director of the New York Project at City to City. And I have the honor to be part of this conversation, subbing for Jen, but also the honor of getting to be part of a conversation with three people that I've known for a long time, just personally and also professionally, because I used to work at Redeemer before I was the Executive Director for the New York Project. So this is super fun. Our aim tonight is to have fun. So I'm going to actually have the three of you introduce yourselves today and also talk about when your church is planted and all of that.
Yes. Justin Adour, Senior Pastor of Redeemer East Harlem. We planted in September of 2019, 4 months before the pandemic hit. So great time to plant a church, but the Lord's been good.
I'm Pete Nicholas. As my accent would suggest, I'm an Englishman in New York who recently moved across in August of 2022 to be the senior pastor at Redeemer Downtown. And Redeemer Downtown was planted in 2012. So I kind of arrived here pretty soon, just before its 10-year anniversary.
And when did you find out when Redeemer Downtown was planted?
I was probably mentioned to me in the selection process and then I forgot it. And then Mai just reminded me very helpfully.
It's okay. I barely know my own history. My name is Michael Keller. I'm the senior minister of Redeemer Lincoln Square. And we planted in, I guess it was April of 2017. And I like to say I've been in and around Redeemer for a long time, but still pretty new to the whole culture and shebang as of, I guess, 7 years ago.
So speaking of which, Michael, for those who may not know, and this is a big question, how would you describe Redeemer Presbyterian Church? What is the start? Can you share the origin story?
I think, that's better for superheroes, like to see the origin story. I think it's always funny to ask somebody who's like part of the history to like describe the history, since a lot of it was when I was younger. But I've been told that Tim and Kathy Keller, who happened to be my parents as well, that they were tasked to find a planter for their denomination to plant in New York City in the late 80s. And looking around and trying to find somebody to go plant, they couldn't find anybody that was willing or able or ready. And over time, both my mother and my father, they developed a love for planting and wanting to plant a church. Their hope was to have like a small little church that maybe just 100 people would come out and be there. And I think fast forward and then what Redeemer became, I think the secret sauce to how Redeemer started, what I've been told again, is that in the late 80s, there was a lot of campus ministries. There was a lot of people who were meeting Christians, non-Christians on campuses. People were becoming Christians, but there wasn't a church that was sort of an easy place to take people who are new to the faith. Mm-hmm. And when Redeemer started, because it was new, because new churches meet new people really well, but also its DNA was sort of centered on this idea of everything has to make sense to everybody, non-Christians and Christians alike. So no tribal language, no kind of extra language where people don't understand what that is. And so what ended up happening is people came, they were either recently converted or they become a Christian at Redeemer. They bring their non-Christian friends. Those people convert, and then there's just sort of this sort of giant explosion of people coming and growing and change. So that's what I've been told. But you actually been on staff at Redeemer. You were there during these sort of iterations and stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, it's fascinating because I joined as a project manager, launching the Redeemer Westside congregation, which was also opening W83 in 2010. And it was incredible because I'd been a member of Redeemer since 2004. But I just, I was coming in as a project manager for David Bisgrove. And at the time, it was this beautiful season of implementing this vision that Tim and the leadership and the elders had, which was ultimately that a megachurch is not spiritually healthy to reach the city. And so they had worked on a very thoughtful plan to sort of decentralize Redeemer and make it not about Tim, but actually have it be incarnational in the neighborhood. And for there to be churches, maybe a network of churches, that might be 2 or 3 or 4 of them. And so it was an incredible time to be there. I also think just organizationally, they had that wisdom in, I think, 1998. And then they took the next 20 years to carefully follow through, and just the faithfulness of God in that. I also think it's incredible that here we are having this conversation with you three, because in many ways, you three are representing this dream of a healthy missional movement that Redeemer could become instead of just becoming a mega church that was centered around Tim Keller. And so I think it's brilliant. I think it's incredible. I'm sure there are others in the audience I see some elders who remember those painful conversations, because who doesn't want to become a mega church and centered around Tim Keller? Who says, actually, this might not be what Jesus wants for our city. And so I'm just somebody who came in on the implementation side of that in 2010. And so it's been incredible. And then just being able to serve at City to City on the New York project, which is not just the Redeemer Network, but beyond. So it's been incredible.
So back to your original question of like the origin story to like where we are now. What I love is here you guys are executing, trying to build this thing, and yet I'm still sort of an outsider looking in, like, oh yeah, I was there for that, but I don't remember any of that. So now I'm trying to figure out what actually happened there, which is actually a very out of body experience and very interesting. But what's so fascinating about Redeemer and its DNA, which I know we'll talk about later, but at the very least, it had this idea that the thing that's going to change the world is this concept of gospel and this concept of good news, that what will move us and change us is the acceptance and love after the understanding of the need because of who you are and what you don't have. And that combination changes you and moves you up and out into the world. And so I think Redeemer's at a really interesting place because we have this DNA. And I think I heard it in something when you just said there, but in some ways, why am I here for this? What I'm here for is, there's a lot of folks that I think there might be a narrative that they think that the reason our Redeemer became Redeemer is because there was this generational person that launched it, and we can have a conversation about that if you want. But I think if the DNA is really what we think it is, this gospel centrality, this power that changes and moves us up and out, then I think it would be really amazing and wonderful if this network that is here, that we get to become, can do this as individuals, as people who aren't necessarily generational leaders, but can be able to faithfully execute this DNA through the 2.0 version of this vision to see what actually happens. And I'm here for that. I'm excited about that. So that's how I'd answer that question.
Well, we would love to hear from folks that different than Michael and Mai, who you kind of stepped into an existing history, and in a very unique way. And so would love to hear, like, as you guys consider your role in Redeemer, stepping into this really rich history that predated you. For Pete, you're crossing the pond, as they say, to come here. And here you are, part of this legacy that existed before you. What does that mean for you? How are you processing kind of the baton that you've been passed and how you're moving it forward in this time?
Pete's looking at me. Yeah, I mean, so just to emphasize, yes, it was we talk a lot about theological vision. It was a theological vision that was captivating, that yes, God used this, once in a generation leader to maybe communicate, but many of us are here. Many of us are doing the work that we're doing. There's leaders all over the city who are doing what they're doing, not because of Tim, but because of this theological vision that was very captivating. One that, centered the work of Jesus in all areas of life. One that had a very city center, or a very city positive view of where we lived. I mean, all these things really mattered and were deeply formative. And, for me, my story is how my wife and I ended up in this world it's a very long one. And for those of you that know me, it's a very convoluted story, how one goes from being a Pentecostal pastor.
Are we going to get that right,
Bronx.
We're going to get that story right?
No, it's too long. But being a Pentecostal pastor in the Bronx and now being this Presbyterian, anyway, that's a whole thing. But what really motivated a lot of what we're doing now was that theological vision. So it's what captivated us in the beginning. It's what sustains us now. It's what we're looking forward to God continuing to use into the future. And as we'll talk about more, it still very much informs this network that has existed but is strengthening, because it's part of what we think God is ultimately doing in and through this theological vision. So,
right, and for me, I mean, that theological vision, which is city's emphasis had crossed over to other parts of the world, right? And so I was there in London, having reasonably recently become a Christian. And I remember a Northern Irish friend of mine who was kind of theologically minded, knew that I was trying to find ministries that spoke both to people who weren't Christians and was pastorally rich. And he said, you've got to listen to this guy. So I was introduced to Tim's ministry then. But then very quickly down the line, a few years later, when I was looking to church plan and realized we had no idea what we were doing, a year in, which is always a good time to realize. So the Lord was kind enough to keep us open as a church in London. But because of the ministry of City to City, connected with a conference in City to City, and so really received that theological vision and that training, and then had to kind of distill it and work it out in London. So then fast forward, 7 or 8 years after that, and Redeemer Downtown are doing a search for a new pastor. And so I'd been on the other side of things, literally on the other side of the pond, but working out this theological vision in a very different context. And so what's been fun for me is to come, back over almost to the source, as it were, and now to be trying to work it out with Redeemer Downtown in this new phase, when you've called it 2.0, 3.0, we could debate that. But yeah, so here in New York, with Redeemer Network and seeing it and trying to work it out on the ground. So that's been a thrill for me, and seeing the commonality that we all have, for trying to apply it. So yeah.
That's actually one of the really fun things about this theological vision is, and of course, we've got 3 Redeemer pastors up here, all of whom are in a particular denomination, Presbyterians, but that theological vision has extended way beyond that very small little circle, so that now there's like language that we share with so many other people, so many other leaders, so many other church traditions all throughout the city. And that has actually been really exciting as part of, this Redeemer network. It's not just language or ideas or ministry that we are engaging in, but people are doing this all over. And that's
just for ourselves.
Yeah, it's been so exciting to watch that. So.
So we've talked a bit about you stepping into this legacy, but let's fast forward to the present. And today, as we're talking to each of you, even though you're individual pastors of distinct Redeemer churches, you're also part of the Redeemer network of churches. And so, Justin, other than the 3 churches represented here in our conversation, who else is part of the network?
Yeah, so there are currently 5 Redeemer churches. So East Side, West Side, Downtown, LSQ, and East Harlem, all kind of starting in that order. We may end up talking about number 6. That's to TBD. Well, I think we'll pin that for a second. But as of right now, there are 5. And let's see, when did all the separation happen? That happened in
2016.
2016. Yes. Okay, so 2016. All the churches formalized as their own local congregations. And in that time, that was also when Tim was transitioning and retiring from his role. And so there was this desire to build a network of churches. As you could imagine, though, it just takes some time to get your legs after someone like Tim steps aside. And so that took a little bit of time. The pandemic kind of really hit the brakes on any network development because everybody was in survival mode. And so coming out of the pandemic in the last couple of years, we've spent a lot of time trying to re-engage, reimagine what a network might look like. And we can talk more about what that has looked like and what that's been. But as of right now, that network is 5 churches with soon to be number 6.
Okay. Yeah, and then also to link in, there's the affiliates, as I suppose it would be a catch-all term. So there's other organizations that have spun out of the Redeemer, kind of churches over the years. So Center for Faith and Work, Redeemer Counseling Services, Hope for New York, and City to City, to mention those as well. And so I suppose, within a wider ecosystem is a language that, or word that's used often in City to City. They also make up or are connected with, the kind of Redeemer world, as it were, in New York. Yep.
Well, so how does the network actually function? And it's okay if it's half-baked, because I think all networks are fragile and wrestle with the right things. So feel free to be authentic about the stuff you're still trying to figure out.
Are you saying it's okay for the answer to be half-baked or for the network to be half-baked? Because they're two very, they probably are both half-baked.
You choose.
I'll give us, I'm not going to give us a full answer, but I want to give us a partial answer, which is this. There are formal and informal aspects of every network. The formal aspects of a network are, what are you doing together that you're better together, that you're not better apart? There are formal things that need to be agreed upon. And in the 2.0 version of the network, I think, I'm looking at my colleagues over here, I think we're working through that still. I think we're figuring out the best definition of those. As far as the informal, we already share, not just the DNA, but we also share, shared vision and desire, what we want to do, where we want to do it together. We meet regularly, we pray regularly, we do events together. We actually have come up with codes of figuring out how to, if one person or one church does an event, is this event that's for the whole network? Is it just for the local church? Is there something in between? So we've come up with those kind of things, but I think we're allowed to say we're in transition and we're in process, and it's exciting because we're coming to the table going, what does this look like and how does it look? But I think there's both a formal and informal way to do it. Is that fair? Would you guys agree with that?
Sure.
Or would you be like, no, Michael, you're wrong. You're completely off.
I actually think the informal parts of the network are the bits which end up being more robust over the long term. Because you can, structures can come and go. You can take them up and put them down again. But actually, it's the informal. I'd highlight 2 things. I think you've actually got to get on, because otherwise you will just choose to invest your time in other things that are more life-giving. And then the common vision, as Michael mentioned, the things we can do together that we can't do apart, and having a genuine sense of what those things are. And we're working that out at the moment. But I think, we like each other. We enjoy each other's company. It's life-giving when we're in a room together. And part of that life-giving dynamic is we're animated by this theological vision of what is it that we can do together. And I suppose the other thing just to throw in is there's a sense of stewardship as well. We've got this exciting legacy. It was kind of like, you could use the metaphor of a family with a very clear father figure. And then as that father figure steps to one side, the sons and daughters, the kind of siblings then need to inhabit their own identities, which is no longer just dictated by their father and, his ministry. And actually, so there's been a bit of a sense of us all as churches getting to know who we are and who we are as we relate to one another, which is very healthy and just takes time. And then we redefine our relationships in that context.
Just to add to there's an example of that relational value, just spending time with Pete, hearing Pete's story. What I got to learn is that Pete, he actually kind of came into the ministry through a program that in London about, basically he was in the vocational world of, was it consulting? Was it?
Yeah, management consulting.
Yeah. So, and he got into a program at a church to kind of explore, full-time ministry. And, I heard about that and we were like, well, we need programs like that in at Redeemer. So we started putting our heads together with our teams and came up with this thing called RAMP, which it was your acronym. What does it stand for?
Great acronym. Redeemer Apprentices for Ministry Program. But I think the acronym came first and we just tried to workshop the words in there.
Which if you know Redeemer, everything is an acronym, right? It's CTC, Hope for HFNY, Hope for New York, everything. So we had to do that because that's what it means to be Redeemer. But it's just been beautiful. We're going to try it out, and we've shown it to the network, and the network's like, this is a great idea. Try out the beta aspect of it, and see how it goes. And so it's been fun to do things like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote Robert Guerrero, who's not even here, but one of the things that he said to me a while ago, and he was saying this as a compliment about Redeemer, was he said, many churches, when they're nearing 35 plus, nearing 40 years, they die. And Robert said the beauty about Redeemer is that it's very restless. But it's restless in that it wrestles with things like mission and who are we and what is our calling and how do we reach the city. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So I commend you on the wrestling and the uncertainty and stepping into things and building it, in the pace of trust, right? And in liking each other. Because network stuff is very hard.
So we talked about, which I love that, Michael, you mentioned this conviction that we're better together. And in order to be better together, that typically requires a lot of wrestling, a lot of conversations, a lot of honest moments, and a lot of stretching and growing. In particular, we're curious, you as lead pastors, how have you worked to uniquely shape the ministry of your church and contextualize to the needs of the people and the neighborhoods you serve while staying together as a movement and as a network?
We're still figuring it out. Just want to really emphasize that.
I think we said it, but we can say it again.
Yeah, I think we'll say it a few more times. So the theological vision that we feel captivated by, and we keep talking about it. So let me just maybe explicitly state what that theological vision might be. So it is an emphasis on the centrality of the work of Jesus in all areas of life. It is a city positive vision, believing that to not have a cynical posture toward the city, but a genuinely loving, we want to engage with the city, we love the city posture. It is a desire to engage in areas of both the beauty of our city, but also the brokenness of our city through mercy and justice. I mean, these are kind of like the core central things when we talk about a theological vision. The idea that our work matters to God, and ensuring that people see that the gospel has something to say about how they inhabit their workplaces. All right, so this theological vision is not a theological vision that is for any particular, we would say, not for any particular demographic of the city, neighborhood of the city. It transcends all of that. So because that's the case, it ought to then be that theological vision can be contextualized in a way that makes sense in different communities and contexts throughout New York. And so because of that, I think for us, it would be, all right, if we can all agree that this is the theological vision that we're going to rally around, it might look pretty different, and it does look very different in all of our contexts. But because we still have that same language, that same basic operating system, it allows us to still, this works. Because of the operating system, the network functions. It all works together because we're talking the same language. And so because our contexts are different, it doesn't necessarily mean that our collaborations together can't work, as long as we're all okay with the fact that it's going to look pretty different in our different contexts. I don't know, would you guys agree with that?
I thought that was really helpfully put. And I think I often think of it in contrast to a franchise model. So a franchise model, you kind of know the menu, you know the things you do, and you just, wherever you go, you do the same thing. And McDonald's franchise looks effectively the same wherever it goes. And it's in contrast to that where it's actually, and so what we've had to do at Redeemer Downtown, so I imagine for both these guys, if we got into more of their stories of their plants, what they had to do as their plants is work out from ground up, what is the inhabiting of that theological vision going to look like in their different contexts. We've had a slightly different journey because downtown was planted some 10 years ago. And so coming in, one of the things we needed to do was to refresh that theological vision and give ourselves the freedom to think about what it looks like now. And so there's a commonality there. It's a bit like the family similarity. You know, if you were to look at me and my brother, you would see certain commonality of traits. We both are follically challenged, both devastatingly handsome. But then you would also see differences as well. And I think that's often what you see between the churches. And so for us at Downtown, we had to enter into a vision of values discernment process, really praying to the Lord to reveal it to us, whilst also having a conversation with the dynamics of where we'd come from to then land on our vision and our values for our current season. And if you look at that now, there's certain things you can definitely hear. So one of our values is city hopeful, which is that city positive thing. Another one is to be an inviting community, which is to both invite people in and therefore to be sensitive to those who are exploring Christian faith, but also to be attractive. Another one is to be deeply formed, which is the gospel changes everything. So you can see the resonance, but it's got a slightly particular way of manifesting in our context. And I think that's what we're talking about.
I would add one more value that I know it's always around, but it's definitely the gospel centered, which is the works and life of Jesus applied to everything, all level of life. It's the city positive. It's the our faith and our work, but it's also the movement mindset. That movement mindset means you can do too much movement where you overstructure things like the franchise model, where everything is just you're trying to put a McDonald's on every corner. Or there's the contextual version, which is, and then you can do no movement mindset, where you're just like, well, whatever happens, happens. The idea of a movement is that we do operate as a network where we come together and say, again, what do we really do, and how do we do it well, and how do we care for the people in our midst? But then how do we care for the people who are not in our midst? How do we go out and do that? Now I know it's not lost on me that your question was asked about what are we wrestling about, and we went straight to contextualization, which I think it is fair to say that is something that we're wrestling about. Right. But I think it's also fair, restate and say it again. I mean, part of wrestling is knowing how to do this post 2020 with the pandemic, and most of our churches had to start or restart, and there was a lot of work on that. I mean, there was a lot of emphasis just going into keeping the lights on and figuring that out. But what's beautiful in some ways is that you come out on the other side and you say, hey, you're here, we're all here. Okay, what are we doing now? How are we doing it? And what's the best way to do it? And that's not necessarily reinvent the wheel, and not necessarily try to do something that we don't need to both be doing. What does that actually look like? So usually my paradigm is, what are we keeping together? Because the gospel DNA is something, it's good as it is. What are we renewing? What are we trying to try differently because it didn't work quite the right way, whether it was discipleship or the pipeline or things like that? And then what might be new that we all, because of our context, has to be new because history is different and we have to be new in our context, in our spaces. So those are all active questions.
And the other thing I would throw in there, you can't curate movement. Mm-hmm. It's not something that we have control over or the ability to employ. Movement requires a genuine sensitivity to the work of the Spirit in our churches, in our network, and beyond. Within church planting, we'll say, there can certainly be an emphasis on things like metrics and demographic studies and looking at a map to discover where our current brand of Christianity currently doesn't have its footprint. And so that's the place that we need to go. There's all kinds of different things that we can try to emphasize in order to generate some sense of movement. But if we're honest, and if we're realistic, none of this happens without the Spirit of God working and us very much being attuned to that leading, this leading of the Spirit. And I say that, emphasize that, because I think one of the things that we all need to figure out locally for our churches, but that we very much need to have a sense of as a network of churches, is how is the Spirit leading us in this movement? And what might that mean, not just for the network, but how does that then play out on the ground differently? I guess what I'm trying to say is to not focus on an attempt at movement, but to focus on the leading of the Spirit, which then we pray leads to an ongoing.
Is that different than can you be movement minded without making a focus on the movement? You know what I mean? Can that be a value, or is that not a value so much?
Well, I think one of the ways you see it, and I've seen it with both of you two, is when you An authentic movement of the Spirit is gospel-centered, right? Because the Spirit and the gospel obviously go together. And so therefore there's the generosity of, because that's fundamentally who the Lord is. He's generous. He gives his son to us when we don't deserve him. And therefore to really grasp that is to become generous in your disposition. And one of the challenges always with churches is this kind of like to protect and to try to hold on versus to give away. So for example, one of the ways we've seen that concretely, Justin's the most recent of the church plants, and he's been chairing the network conversations within that, which is a significant time commitment. He's served us in doing that. So he's being movemental in that. And that's been huge for us as well. LSQ have got this real desire to be collaborating and working. And again, coming out of the pandemic, any one church could say, well, I just want to look after home base. But I've seen within the network coming in this movementalism, which is this authentic work of the Spirit, which is shown in that very practical thing of, are you prepared to give away and not just to try to hold on? And as you seek to do that to serve others, because you have to give time and money and resources to that, then the Spirit takes that and starts to work that out in myriad ways that are actually beyond what you can control.
Yeah.
And a movement ultimately is generative. And Justin, I appreciate what you're saying, that we have to rely on the Spirit. We're just following the Spirit. Humans cannot generate the movement. And so a church planting, a gospel movement, we can't generate that. So my question is for Pete, because the network is about to grow from 5 to 6. So share with us about that, but also share with us in terms of what did it mean to listen to the Spirit in that generative decision of downtown planting another church?
Yeah, there's a few things to say. So actually how the church plant came about. So we're now committed as downtown to be planting into downtown Brooklyn in January to Easter 2025 with David Lee, who's been assistant pastor at Redeemer Downtown for a number of years and is a brilliant guy, well-liked, and got a wonderful gospel heart. But even the way that came about is, you see exactly what Justin is talking about. First of all, he and his wife, Anne, moved and happened to move into a place in Brooklyn. So they were in Hell's Kitchen before, moved into Brooklyn. And so that was something before we were actually thinking concretely about planting. The second thing was when I was coming into to Redeemer Downtown, I don't think David would mind saying that he'd been tapped on the shoulder by another church in New York who were saying, we'd love to plant. Would you plant with us? And so he came to me and to the elders and said, I've been approached. What do you think? And we actually had to say at that time, look, we haven't been through this discernment process of what the Spirit is calling us as a church to. So we can't commit right now to a yes or no. And I was saying, look, I love planting. I'm a planter, but it would be wrong for me and the elders just to kind of go in a room and the smoke rises from the chimney and then we come out and announce to the congregation, we're doing a plant. And we could have sold that probably, but we really felt that was wrong. So I had to say, look, you seem great. I'm getting to know you. This seems from the Lord, but we can't commit to that, so we need to wait. And fair play to him. He was godly about it with his wife, and they waited on the Lord. And then we went through the vision values process. One of the themes that came out of that was the church was saying, when are we going to plant? We want to plant. So that kind of gospel DNA was in there. And then with David and his wife, Anne, having moved to Brooklyn, and with looking at Brooklyn, if it was a city, I think it would be the 3rd largest city in the US, and not that many church plants, there, and some had shut down over COVID. Suddenly it made a ton of sense of, well, why do we do that? So you see factors beyond our control, a willing heart, an openness of David and Anne's part to say, here am I, Lord, use us. And that all came about to the church plant now, and we're really excited about the future, really.
Mm-hmm. So something that we've been talking about this in recent days, and I do think it's maybe something about what has sustained our network currently, is that, so in that story, and that very much resonates with, for my wife and I, that idea of, all right, there's an opportunity to plant, but not feeling like it's the right time or the right context, or there's other things that need to be at play. And my wife and I, we waited almost 12 years from the time that we felt like the Lord was maybe calling us to plant to actually church planting. And there's a whole long story in that, but that resonates a lot, that there needs to be this kind of slow willingness to let the Spirit kind of lead you and guide you. And something that I find interesting about that is the way that it intersects with all of us being Presbyterians.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah.
I know, I was going to say, speak for yourself.
Well, okay. Presbyterians are not good at doing anything quickly.
So true.
And
true.
everything is a committee. Everything is got some framework. Oh my goodness, it's a lot. But what that does is it does kind of slow down your pace enough to trust and listen to the leading of the Spirit. Because one of the things that can very quickly happen with networks is networks can have a lot of energy. There's a lot of momentum. And because of that, we want to kind of keep that momentum going. And so we, throw things at this momentum to keep things moving. And sometimes that can work out. Sometimes it doesn't work out because it gets spread too thin. Not enough planning or thought has maybe gone into some of what's been rolling out. We got a lot of problems with things happening slowly. But one of the things that we tend to not have a problem with is that whenever we've made a decision, it has been thought about. It has been committed to death. And so by the time you get to the place where you're actually executing, let's be real. Redeemer's been around for 35 years. And granted, there's been, various attempts at various church plants, but we're at number 6 in 35 years. But I do think that there's actually something healthy about that because it's been a slow build, and it's part of what I think has allowed us to continue all these years later.
I have colleagues at City to City who say that the Redeemer Network is the oldest and the healthiest church planting network in Manhattan. And so that's 35 years of faithfulness, of maybe overthinking it, Justin. Your Pentecostal vibes are coming through there. But that's just, I don't know, that's a beautiful faithfulness because there isn't another network in Manhattan that's 35 plus years going on to many, many more years. So.
And I appreciate Justin's tone and tenor of when he was talking about what's so great about our network of we think through things. For every pro, there's always a con, right? This is actually where folks are like, who don't care about polity, which now sound very Presbyterian talking about polity, but polity matters because, you can be top down and just, this is what the denomination says and does it. You can be bottom up where who wants to go and go out. And then our polity, which is death by committee, the benefit is slow and deliberate. But actually, I can also say after 7 years of being a Presbyterian church planter, you can also hurt a lot of people with that because sometimes the need of the moment, and this has happened just in the past couple of years because of current events, but the need of the moment needs a quick answer, and our polity can't move that fast. And so you have to say, okay, you need an answer. I'll get back to you. We got to go talk in this group and in that group and in this group, and then you come back and you can also hurt people that way too. So I think there's a lot of benefit because when we do something, it's measured, it's thought out, and we're not going to hurt people with a my way, the highway kind of thing. Which I think you can see that in some circles with certain leaders, but I think you can also hurt people with too slow. That's the negative side. You were talking about the positive side, and I just felt like it's important to give a full circle of some of the pros and cons of our network mentality.
Very fair. Yep.
You guys are bearing out my conviction about good podcasts is that if you get good, interesting people and you just step out of the way, really amazing conversation emerges. Because all of you have touched on really, really rich things. You've mentioned about the Holy Spirit, and why I think that's striking, especially with where we want to take the conversation, is that we at City to City, we really firmly believe that gospel movement is a work of the Holy Spirit, that it involves focused prayer from the people of God on behalf of the lost for the city. And so in light of Center City, Manhattan, but all of Manhattan for that matter, being one of the more difficult places to plant in our city, the unique calling that the Redeemer Network holds for gospel renewal, church planting, given that it's one of the healthiest and oldest networks and churches in New York City, in Center City. The question is, what should the church in New York City be praying for as they direct their prayers towards Center City?
I can start us off a little bit. authentically, when my wife Rebecca and I and our two boys were moving across from London to New York, we'd planted in London. We had revitalized a church in London, and we'd been part of the setting up the London project in London. And all of those three were significantly difficult, hard, and faced significant spiritual opposition. And that always impacted us personally as well. So we knew, because it wasn't our kind of first ministry rodeo, crossing the pond, coming into New York and coming in as a pastor at Redeemer Downtown, that if we did not pray, and if we did not have a team of people praying, if we did not kind of raise up this frontline prayer movement at Redeemer Downtown, that all of our labor would be in vain. I think we felt that in our bones in a way that if you'd asked me as a young church planter, back in 2013, I would kind of give you the same answer. But I think that having lived through kind of 3 iterations of it and really experienced it, I think we just really said, we've got to pray. So when we came in, one of the thrilling things for us was, I think actually the pulpit search committee had so struggled to find anyone decent for the role that they had really prayed into it as well. And so any church that was kind of coming out of COVID and everything that had meant and all those challenges probably had survived because people had turned to prayer. I like to think that anyway. And certainly that had been the case for Redeemer Downtown. So there was this kind of nascent, your dad would often talk about frontline prayer movement. And you mentioned in the top of the segment, the Fulton Street revival, where, prayer had really birthed a revival or a renewal movement of the gospel in New York historically. So we felt this need for that for ourselves personally. And then we desperately wanted to work with what was going on in embryo at Downtown to get that. So we can talk strategies, we can talk vision and values, theological vision. Those are all really important. But what I love about what Justin was emphasizing, the work of the Spirit, is it has to be birthed out of an authentic sense of need for prayer. And I actually think that kind of reformed networks, particularly like the Presbyterian Church in America, are best when they almost inhabit that Pentecostal-esque, when we're talking globally, stance on prayer, which is, Lord, lead us. We can't do this without you. So that's what we've been involved in. It's been a thrill to be seeing that, really.
My instinct is to want to flip your question.
Flip it.
You reverse it.
Yeah. I'm not gonna. We'll finish that lyric. You asked how those, if I understood your question, outside of Center City can be praying for Center City in the church plant movement. And I think that's well and good. I think those not part of Center City need to be praying for Center City. I think my prayer would be that those who are often centered, that the prayer would be that they stop emphasizing their centeredness and actually have a greater and growing heart for the margin. So for those who are on the margin praying for the center, my prayer would be that the Lord would use the prayers of the margins to encourage the center to care, to continue to care and invest in and see the margins. So I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking for.
No, it is.
But I do think it's a very needed and necessary thing, because here's the bottom line. I mean, let's be real. New Yorkers are very proud New Yorkers in general. Manhattanites, which when we talk about Center City, which I know this is just me. That's such an ill-defined term. I'm not even sure what you mean by Center City. There are a variety of different opinions on how to define Center City. And I maybe feel that tension because usually when people say Center City, they think about Manhattan. But then when they think about Manhattan, they're definitely not thinking about East Harlem. So anyway, that's a whole nother thing. If you want to go down that rabbit trail, happy to do that with you, bro. But I think in the end, what I would really like for us to see is that Manhattan is a unique thing on its own. It's got so much diversity in it. And so Center City, it's hard to define Manhattan as Center City, but I'm rambling because to get to this point, when we're planting in places like Manhattan, we do tend to get really myopic about what we're doing. And we miss so much of what's going on in the city. And so I think it's good to continue to emphasize whatever we mean by Center City. We trust that the Lord's at work here, but I do think that there's a need to kind of break out of that centeredness and have a greater experience of what the Lord's doing broadly in the city?
When I heard that question, and you're absolutely right, Justin, that the term center city is not very defined. I went immediately maybe to just an old definition that center city meant people from a professional background. So it's more on a socioeconomic mentality, which traditionally has been some of the most unreached people when it comes to Christianity. But I love your definition of how beautiful it would be if people not center city are praying for those inside because to know who Jesus is, and then those inside are praying, like, what would it look like to move out and outside of our myopic view? Because when you asked the original question of what should we be focusing on, I went straight to the needs. Like, the people that are often in my church are people who think that their biggest problem is time.
Yeah.
And their biggest problem is money. And that their biggest problem is that they're experts in their background. And so I'm only going to be able to talk about what I say I believe because I need to be an expert. And therefore they're not experts. They don't think they're experts. So they don't talk about their faith. So I think of all their needs and I'm like, if we're praying for each other and we're praying around and we're in each other's lives, which I think New York City has an amazing opportunity to do that, but often we're still in siloed spaces. How amazing would that be to actually change us and move us, because it pushes us outside. That's what prayer does by definition. You literally leave your own self and you're somewhere else. You're with God. You're with others. You're doing other things. And so I love your definition. I think that was really helpful.
Yeah, I think also coming back to the imagery of an ecosystem always helps me. When we were in London, we were church planting into a central, context, but in London, lots of the urban poor are right in the city centers, like there are places around here, like Chelsea Projects for us at downtown. And so we needed resources initially when we were starting anyway from other churches that had them. And so I think you see that one of the dangers is if you focus too much on center city as an end in and of itself. But if you see it as a part of the wider ecosystem where actually you realize that to those who've been given much, much is demanded. And so there are real spiritual poverty needs in Center City. But once people in Center City start being gripped by the gospel, they have disproportionate resource or sometimes skill, stewardship opportunities that then need to be stewarded out to other places. So for example, as we plant into Brooklyn, and granted, downtown Brooklyn might even be part of Center City, but as you plant deeper into there will be planting, God willing, into places where there are going to be more financial needs. And you don't want the model of every church plant to be, well, can it stand on its own financial feet? Otherwise, you just won't be able to do the right missional things. But we have disproportionate resources in downtown by God's grace. So how can we give away and not just keep it for ourselves and have a ton of wonderful gospel ministers serving us in wonderful ways, which would be lovely, but actually say, well, let's choose to have fewer and give away more. So we're setting up a mission committee to try to do that. We're wanting to partner with City to City and have that conversation. I think that's what you're getting at, is actually we need to start looking out and not just think about us only, whilst recognizing there is genuine spiritual poverty, of course, in Manhattan. That's part of the point.
That's fantastic. So much to chew on. This next question, I really want to be sensitive, in particular to you, Michael. And just to say from the outset that you don't have to respond to this next question. But I also want to be sensitive to both of you as spiritual sons. As we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of Tim's passing, I've been thinking a lot about you, Michael, and honestly, all of you. And the question on my heart is quite simply, how are you doing since Tim's passing? And how could we be praying for you and your family, Michael, as well as for you both and your families?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I will answer your question. It's a question that's always on my mind every day. I think there's probably there's a personal component to it and there's a corporate component. And I do want to hear from you guys as well, because personally, there's something when you lose your father, lose your husband. I think the family's just, honestly, we're just trying to still come to terms with grief. And happily, as a pastor, you have resources that you've told everybody else about and how to access them. It's very different when the physician heal thyself moment. So, but grief is one of those things that just it's around you, and it always will be. And learning that that's just a ring on the tree, so to speak, that it's part of who you are. And there's beauties about it because it points you to more than this world, and then there's also just things are tougher, things are harder. So regular struggle for the family for me. I think I lost a lot. My family lost a lot, but corporately, I also know that he wasn't just a father. He was a spiritual father for a lot of folks, a mentor for a lot of people. Justin and I had a lot of convos about, I'll get emotional about it, just the way he was a father to others. And so it was actually very strange to right immediately after be grieving and then people calling and texting and wanting to meet up because they were grieving too and trying to help them in their grief with my own grief. And that's an odd thing that I'm probably still working through. But I also, it's beautiful. I now cherish when people tell me stories because I want to hear more stories because it's a beautiful thing. And so I just know it's all around. It's not just me. So I don't know. How about you guys?
Yeah. Of course, very, very different experience for us. But yeah, there was, the Lord used him in remarkable ways in my own life, like for my family, my wife. So at that level, of course, there's still this ongoing sense of gratitude, right, for how the Lord used him. But it's also the case that, he was somebody that Lord gave me opportunities to know. And that's, even Michael and I have talked about this, but even just the care that he had for me and my family in the midst of some, toward the end. So just the way that he loved and cared for us in the midst of some things that we were going through.
Personal things, just talking
personal things
about life. Not just theology, but just how to do life.
100%. These were personal things. And, that it's, I miss him. I miss him a lot. And, that's kind of on the personal side. I think on the church side, one of the things I'm encouraged by, so in the life of our church, there are certainly people that know of Tim Keller, but there's also people in our church that have no idea who Tim Keller is. He means nothing to them. And I actually find that incredibly encouraging because it's like this thing that, again, back to this theological vision.
Oh, he would love that.
Yeah, for sure. Back to this theological vision, it's mobilizing into places that, just didn't know him. And on that front, I think it's actually a very encouraging thing as I think about his legacy. And, Pete, you'd mentioned this, that word earlier, that there's a stewardship of legacy that I think we all feel. And for me, it's encouraging to know that's part of what the legacy is going to be. So.
Yeah, my mind goes back to the Redeemer night that we did, and it turned out to be, as we all know, on the day of Tim's passing. And he had pre-recorded, what turned out to be really his last address to the churches, which I always felt after the fact, I don't think I was present enough of mind or spirit in the moment to realize it, but I felt that was the Lord's way of honoring him and giving him a kind of a final word to say. How many pastors get to do that? A kind of final word to their beloved church, but he really did. And his focus as ever was not on himself, but was on the churches and what they were going to be. And so my experience with Tim was much less personal, coming in later into the Redeemer Network, necessarily a couple of conversations, a few things he was involved in the London project, etc., like that. So less personal for me, but I think just that landing point on what he saw and what he hoped for the network. And so it emphasizes that sense of stewardship, as you've talked about it, and taking that forward, because that was what he wanted to do. So I take it as an enormous privilege to be part of that. And particularly in the light of the time, on the back of it that we're living in. So
I do have a quick story that, since this is a podcast and, insider information, I actually was there when he was filming that little segment. He was actually filming for Gospel in Life for this series where he was going through books of the Bible. So you can probably find the what he was wearing for one of those things, and then what he was wearing for that. And he actually wasn't going to do time was kind of going on, and I was over at the house for some reason. I don't remember why. And I said, because of the network where we were meeting, I said, hey, I know the goal was for you to come live or maybe live stream you in, but would it be too hard for you just to film this to just in case? And there was I forgot what time it was, but there was we weren't thinking about him having any problems with health at all. But he said, you know what, I've already written this 15 minutes. Yeah, sure, I'll do it. And he went off and did it, and we had it ready for that. So it was kind of beautiful. But just to circle back to what you guys were saying earlier, that if we really believe so much in this theological vision with this DNA, and it works, then we're showing the world that there are answers and there are ways to love and serve and contextualize out in the world, and it doesn't necessarily need a figurehead like generational person. It can be the gospel itself. It can be the DNA itself, and that's what excites me to be able to do it with you guys.
Amen. Also, we're talking about this thing that maybe people aren't aware of, this Redeemer Night thing. So just quick context, and actually one of the reasons I'll say why I think it's important to narrate it. So we were doing this. So the network we've been over. It
was brand new. We just come back from I think somebody said, "What do we do together?" Like, I don't know. What we should do? Let's just do
a worship night.
Let's do a worship night together. That's by the way how cool. That
was the low hanging fruit.
Really sophisticated.
Very sophisticated.
Yeah, no one has ever done it before.
And that was David Bisgrove's idea.
Yes, it was. So, we'll give David credit for that.
So we just randomly picked a night, May 19th, to do this all church gathering.
It's amazing.
At the time when we first thought about doing it, the plan was that Tim was going to be there, and was going to share, and it wasn't going to be about him, but he was going to there to encourage this collaboration of churches. So random night. We, a few months down the road, his health, of course, begins to decline. And so it was like, all right, we're not really sure if maybe he could be there or not. So let's record this just in case he can't physically be there. So he records it. Fast forward to May 19th. That's the day that he passes away. And so for us, we had this whole plan for this Redeemer Night. And of course, we had to kind of quickly pivot to adjust how we were going to handle that night. But what was phenomenal about it, and this was just the Lord's kindness, was that it was on that day that, of course, all of us were grieving in various ways. And the Lord gave us as churches opportunities to be together in the midst of that grief. But then what he said, if you haven't seen it, you can go to the website, redeemer.com. It's on the website.
You got to watch it.
It just was like exactly what all of us needed. And so part of me is like the Pentecostal side of me is like,
but why was it what you needed? What was it? What did he say?
Well, I mean, he reiterated, I think, a lot of things. He reiterated things that the theological vision that we needed to hear. But the fact that he did it as like the last word to the churches, was very much like, again, it was the Pentecostal side of me was like, this is spirit. The Reformed person in me that was like, oh, this was Providence, foundations of the earth kind of stuff.
And the answer is yes.
Yes, it was both of those things. Yeah. And so I narrate all of that because I think for us, walking out of that night, it was a reminder that the Lord's kindness is with us, that the Lord's grace is with us, that the Lord is still at work amongst us. And it was an encouragement to say, this is probably going to be one of the most challenging things as a network you're going to have to face. And in the midst of this challenge, know that I am near. And that was incredibly, I don't want to say healing, because healing is, we're all going to be progressively healing until the eschaton, until glory, right? But there was something that the Lord just encouraged us in that I think spurred us on to continue this collaboration just because he showed his kindness to us that night.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Wow. Thank you for all of you for sharing from your heart. And that is just such a beautiful moment of God's kindness and also the Spirit leading and his providence. Thank you for sharing. Really appreciate it. This is season 1 of Gospel Legacy in NYC. This podcast that City to City has started, and intentionally we have focused on the borough of Manhattan in the season, and we have sat with brand new church planters and seasoned historic churches in the same episode and really just unpacked the richness of distinct neighborhoods in New York City. It's been really just a fun, joyous ride. And this is actually the culmination of this season. And we thought we could not complete this season taking a good look at Manhattan without having this moment with you all. One of the final questions that we ask all of our guests is when they pray for New York City, when they pray kingdom prayers, because for us at City to City, we really talk quite a bit about kingdom prayer, forward movement in prayer. When we ask for the kingdom to come, for each of us that looks a distinct way. For some of us that looks like a change in the relationship with the police and the community, that looks like schools improving and crime decreasing and business flourishing. It takes on all these different flavors. And so as we close, would love to hear as you pray for the kingdom to come in downtown and East Harlem and Lincoln Square for the city as a whole, what does that look like? Walk us through what that looks like, what that feels like. Paint that picture for us.
Yeah, I mean, for us, one of the things is I probably put the catch-all term of a sense of spiritual renewal. One of the books I read as I was coming across was Dynamics of the Spiritual Life by Richard Lovelace, one of your dad's favorite books, and ones he'll often, he would often refer to as being formative for the early days of Redeemer. But I think one of the things that focuses on is, it is personal conversion. It is seeing people who are hungry. And I think there's a real spiritual hunger out there in the culture writ large. And we're experiencing that at downtown, and people searching for answers and searching for the one who is the answer, the Lord Jesus, but they just don't know it. So seeing people coming to know him, I mean, it's got to be that. But then not ending there, because the gospel never ends there. As the gospel grips someone's heart, then that spins out into 100 different directions as they really learn what it is to love him well and to love others. And so I think then seeing that renewal working itself out into the downtown community and beyond. So these pockets of revitalization, and that will be in workplaces, and that will be in compassion and justice ministries as well. And that'll be in the simple conversations that happen across a neighborhood hallway as well. So I'm really excited about seeing that, but I think it starts with that personal renewal and then spins out from there. That's what I'm praying for downtown, at least, and that's what I'm praying for the network.
I think what comes to mind when you ask me that question is, so we talk a lot about this in our church, but J.I. Packer, who's actually drawing on John Calvin, he says that the role of the church is to make the invisible kingdom of God visible. And we come back to that all the time, because if there's any orienting vision of what we ought to embody and be as people, of people of Jesus in our neighborhoods, in our city, is to be people that reflect the character and the nature of the kingdom of God. And I think that makes me think about, Psalm 89, that the foundations of his throne are that of righteousness and justice. For us to be a people who embody these things in such a way that we're actually reflecting the kingdom of God. That's a big, bold prayer. That's that's a frontline kind of prayer, but it's very much the prayer. God, help us be a people that reflect your kingdom, that invisible kingdom now.
Yeah, when you asked the question, I actually, my head went to kingdom too. Like, what kind of kingdom prayer does it look like? And in my context, a lot of our people, they, the people who come, again, as I said earlier, that they feel like they're experts, and therefore they feel like they can't do anything or they can't be anything because outside of just their little defined view of what it means to be an expert. And I worry that, I'm part of the same context. How much of that is actually part of my world vision as well? And so the prayer that I try to pray when it comes to kingdom is, Lord, build what you want to build, not what we want to build. Yes. And if we build something and it's not what you want, destroy it. And if we build something you do want, then please make it better, because it's going to be better. Because back to your point earlier, Justin, about, Presbyterians will sit and form and think and think and think. There can be a potential blind spot of, well, we thought it all out and we know exactly how it should go and what it should look like. And so a lot of my prayers in this area is, Lord, destroy what is not yours and build what is, and only let that work with or without us. And we'd love to participate. We'd like to be part of it, the grander vision, but let it be your will, not ours.
Amen.
That's beautiful.
Amen. Amen. Well, could we give our esteemed guest a hand? good news is we're not done, because we have invited you wonderful people to share some questions. And so I'm going to share some questions and invite you all to respond to them. And so one question that stands out is, how do you define the Redeemer DNA as carried through the 5, soon to be 6 churches in the network?
Can you say the question one more time?
How would you, the question just moved. All right. Thank you. Thank you, app. How would you define the Redeemer DNA as carried through the 5, soon to be 6 churches in the network?
I'll go first this time. On one level, there's the definition, right? There's this book called Center Church. There's the DNA, but I also want to create space that there's words are images. They're not always. There's some malleability inside of them, and I think because of our particular context, what gospel-centered looks like in our particular churches are going to look. The gospel's, there's only one gospel, there's only one good news, but it's iteration, its way to say it, its way to move people is going to look different, and I think I want that ability. So when somebody says, how do you define? I think you have to be able to have the majors, and then there's the minor issues. So we major on the majors and minor on the minor issues on one level. But when it comes to the DNA, I think you have the commonality of we agree on these precepts of what that looks like, but we're also okay that we might disagree on the forms of how it actually plays itself out in all the different spaces. And I guess that's how I kind of see it. But I'd love to, what do you guys think?
I mean, it's helpful just to reiterate some of what we said before too. I mean, I agree with all of that. And some of those core central things are going to be gospel centrality in all of life. City positive, mercy and justice, faith and work, church planting, like movement.
Yeah. And I said movement minded. I didn't say movement, it has to be. I said movement minded.
Yeah, movement minded.
Because we hope for if the Spirit leads to do it. Okay. Good.
We're clear, Michael.
Yeah.
But also like evangelism, and by evangelism we mean welcoming to those who are questioning faith. That kind of posture.
Yeah. That's good.
So I think those are maybe some of the central things. You brought up Center Church. If you want to know like the real deep DNA, like Center Church is it. If you haven't read it yet, that's the book to read. But
great answers. There's actually quite a few questions that have a similar theme, and so I'm going to try to bring some of them together so that everyone's question gets somewhat attention. There's kind of a consensus in the room about local contextualization, how your churches engage uniquely your neighborhoods with the gospel, as well as there's questions around like the distinctives of your individual churches that also speak to the neighborhood that you're in. And so to kind of bring summary to these things, I think the more specific way would be, how do you uniquely engage your neighborhoods with the gospel? Because you talked about this DNA that it's very versatile. It can be contextualized. And so how is that looking in your distinct neighborhoods?
We've been on a process of trying to figure this out at Downtown in our current season, because I think one of the things I want to emphasize to that question is it's never static. And it's not static because the neighborhoods aren't static, and it's not static because your community as a church isn't static. And so I really think it's an interaction of those two realities. The neighborhood in which you're in, the contextual reality, as it's sometimes called, in church planting circles of which you're in, and the gospel community that is there. I was actually looking up on the way here. There's a Bonhoeffer quote about community, but he says, because God has bound us together in one body with other Christians in Jesus Christ, long before we entered into common life with them, we enter into that common life, not as demanders, but as thankful recipients. So I coming in, I'm tentative, I say coming into New York, to say I know, because I think I'm a recipient and a steward of that common life of the downtown church community and the way the gospel is impacting that. So partly it's trying to discern what are some of the themes emerging for that. For example, we have an emphasis on community and rich community. We have a desire for deep spiritual formation. We have this legacy of seeking to engage those who don't know Christ with the gospel. And we have a strong desire to be distinctively downtown. When you mesh that with the downtown realities, which have changed a bit. So we have lots of obvious urban poverty and the migrant population around. I mean, they're literally on our doorstep when we arrive on a Sunday. So we have to walk past people, and thankfully they're coming into church as well. That's a bit of a new reality for us. So how are we connecting and engaging with that? But then you go also one block and you've got, co-ops and condos with people who are very wealthy there. And that's also part of the reality. So I think we're seeking to engage with all of that, and therefore seeking to be distinctively good news for the diversity of downtown. So I think diversity is a key factor there, but also stewarding that communal life of the gospel community at downtown as we connect with that. So a more missional orientation for us with a community life focus is really big for us, I think.
So I think being able to explicitly name the ways that the Spirit has been at work for generations before your church is actually very important for contextualization. And then also to be able to explicitly name both the beauty and the brokenness of your community is extremely important for contextualization. Without those dynamics. Oh, and I think the other factor is explicitly naming those that have faithfully served your context for many years is also a very key piece. Without all of that kind of in the soup, contextualization is not going to happen well. So being able to explicitly name all of that, I think that's been very formative and important for us. Our neighborhood, is one of the main landing zones of recent migrants into the city. It's a neighborhood that is so beautiful and vibrant, and yet also has very real brokenness that we'll walk by as we leave the building tonight. So we have a need as a church to engage that beauty, which means participating in the life of the community, and also be a church that cares about that brokenness and advocating for our neighbors in such a way that we are pursuing their flourishing as well. And that takes on all different kinds of forms that I won't bore you with, but being able to name those things has been central.
Justin, I resonate with that because you did it on a local level, but I was just thinking of Redeemer Lincoln Square we planted 7 years ago. It's a strange thing to come out of a Redeemer culture that was planted 30 years ago, but then what's the new version here? And you have to ask yourself, who's come before me? What have they done well? But then what needs to change? And, in that process, and I could be wrong because this is part of the process of trying to figure out what the right context is. I came to the belief that when my father started Redeemer, he was an outsider, so he felt the need to try to meet a particular group of people. There was a very corporate culture that he kind of took on to kind of meet people who live in a corporate culture. And I actually disagree. I disagree with Dad on this. I think he was an outsider trying to own that. And what I believe is that most people who work and live in corporate culture don't want to be. They don't see themselves that way. You don't have to be corporate to meet corporate culture. I think what people are looking for in today's iteration is a lot more authenticity, and what you see is what you get, and letting that kind of lead as far as not just in your preaching, but just in the way that you kind of set up church and that you meet the needs of those around you. But I think that's just an example of listening to you, Justin, of what does that look like? I was like, oh yeah, we've had to do that. And you can do that on a local level, but you can also do it in a ministerial expression level as well.
True.
Thank you for listening to Gospel Legacy in New York City, a podcast brought to you by City to City, New York City. We hope you've enjoyed this live recording with our friends at Redeemer Presbyterian Church. For additional resources from this podcast, check out our show notes below and visit our podcast website, www.gospellegacynyc.com. Your support is greatly appreciated, and if you haven't had the opportunity to do so yet, we invite you to take a moment to subscribe, share this podcast with a friend, and leave a comment or review. We'd love to hear from you. To learn more about Redeemer City to City, New York City, or to connect with us, please visit www.citytocity.nyc. Until next time, we pray that God's church will faithfully reflect the beauty of the gospel in every corner of New York City and wherever you are as well.